Hi, my name is Jill Gass, and thank you for joining us on our poster journey, where we are creating a vision for advancing women's professional cycling worldwide. The synopsis for our poster presentation is that professional women cyclists have an exciting career path with recognition, fiscal security, and advancement opportunity that inspires girls worldwide to become one. The intended outcomes are: one, equity, that women achieve discipline and gender equity in women's professional cycling. Two, that we increase the participation of women in world and national cycling governance. And three, membership, that we create a cohesive international organization of women cyclists who have control of the future of the sport. So join me, Catherine Bertine, Dotsie Bausch, and Iris Slappendell, three of the movers and shakers in women's cycling, as we take this journey to create. So hello to Catherine Bertine. Catherine, I've got a question for you. As a former professional cyclist, documentary filmmaker of Half the Road, and a leading women's cycling advocate and activist, what do you see as the most important influencer in advancing women's professional cycling into the future?
I definitely believe the way that we're going to advance women's sports, cycling included, into the future is by having more media exposure, but not just this concept of, oh, we need more media exposure. We need two things to happen for that to exist. And the first is we need more women in decisions of, or in positions of decision-making power so that these media exposure opportunities exist. If we don't have that first, then we're not going to get to the media exposure. And then the second part is once we do get the media exposure contracted that we need, it has to come at the right time and the right place. You know, so often we will see in sports where there might be women's media exposure, they're considered the opening band to the men's event, right? Or they're put at a different timeline that might not be as marketable as a men's event. So there are two sides to that story that really need to happen for everything to come together. What I just said too about we need more women in the positions of decision makers for women's sports to have media exposure. There are countless amazing men out there who can do the same thing because they're progressive and they're thinking ahead of tradition, and they're understanding that when we invest in women, we have more, not just more media exposure, but it doubles the ROI in most cases to include women, just about in all cases. So for the men and women to really challenge the status quo and say, hey, we're willing to invest in equal media exposure, that's what it's going to take, to really flip the switch and to get everything to come together so that that can happen. And we actually finally see women at the same time doing the same events that we see when we think of sports media. So that's the long/short answer to what it's going to take to really flip the switch and see change happen.
Well, thanks, Catherine, for being on the forefront of women's cycling and for your insights today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you for doing what you're doing, Jill. This is what helps us all move forward. So I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.
So welcome, Dotsie Bausch. Dotsie is one of my longtime buddies. She's a former professional cyclist. She's an Olympic silver medalist at the 2012 London Games. She's an animal rights activist and one of the subjects of the documentary Personal Gold and Game Changer. She's basically a badass in life. And when I think of words to describe Dotsie, profound perseverance and passion are what comes to mind for me. So Dotsie, given your experience, what do you think it will take to achieve equity in women's professional cycling for the future?
Oh, thank you, Jill. You are definitely at the forefront of that movement. And when I think of you, I always think of anything moving women forward in any way, shape, or form. You've had a hand in for your entire life, and so I look up to you as a leader in forging that for our gender. So thank you. Cycling is it's a toughie, right? Because when I think of parity and equity in cycling for men and women, we are probably the very last in line in all of the sports that have created that gender equality. I mean, literally just last year, Catherine Bertine and her crew were able to finally push forward at least a minimum salary for women in professional cycling, which is a little mind-blowing, I think, to the people that might be hearing this that are not steeped in cycling. That just seems like that would have been done, I don't know, 20 years ago. So we have a long road, and we have a long fight ahead of us. And I mean, you mentioned, perseverance and passion, and of course it takes both of those. But what I really see where there is an unweighted and very unequal situation in cycling is that most women find cycling 10 or so years later than men do, right? And start really pursuing it as a passion, as a direction, as something that they may be able to even do for a living. Women start sometimes, high school, early college years. And so because of that, women tend to have already had their degrees, already had their college degrees when they find cycling, and they are pursuing it, and they are maybe going to make it in the pros. And when they are finished with their careers, women oftentimes then go back to what they studied, right? Back to what their degree is in, and pursue that. They kind of, it's like cycling was incredible in their lives and it taught them so much, but it's not necessarily the definition of everything that they are. And so many women tend to leave the sport. For men, it is very, very different. Men start at a very young age. Some start as young as 6 or 7 or 8, but they're at least going full throttle by their early teenage years. And so many men end up pursuing that dream and that passion and skipping school, skipping their education. So when they retire, they don't necessarily have much to fall back on. So they tend to go right back into the sport. They become directors or mechanics, right, or soigneurs. And so because of that, cycling is steeped in being directed by and ruled by and run by men. So I think it's going to take more women to charge that course forward and say, we want to be part of the leadership within cycling, which if they apply for the jobs, they'll get them because they're going to oftentimes be the best candidate, right? So that is, if we see inequality in the pros, it's because we see inequality and non-parity within the realm of who's managing the sport itself.
Boy, Dotsie, that just highlights one of our pillars of what it's going to take to move the sport into a new realm, and that is creating opportunities for women in the sport after they retire. So great insights, and thank you so much for joining us on this project. And we're looking forward to hearing your voice as we transform the sport of women's cycling. So thank you.
Thanks for all you do, Jill. It's my pleasure and honor.
Hi, Iris. I had the great pleasure of working with Iris several years ago on the formation of the Women's Cycling Association. And Iris is a former professional cyclist for the Netherlands, co-founder of the Cyclists Alliance, and she's been named the Billie Jean King of women's cycling by Outside Magazine. Iris, can you share with us how the Cycling Alliance is impacting the future of women's pro cycling?
Well, I think first of all, it's great that a big part of the women's peloton has come together within the Cyclist Alliance, because we felt like we needed a voice represented at all the stakeholders within the sport. And I think just by coming together, by raising our voice, by bringing up ideas on how we could change our sport, has already made a big impact when it comes, for example, to the introduction of a minimum salary for World Tour riders, for maternity leave, for World Tour riders, and for improved insurance regulations. So that's one thing. On the other hand, we're really active in educating riders on their rights. We're giving legal assistance. We're helping them with ethics issues, after career support. So that whole package gives riders a lot more confidence and knowledge, and therefore has a positive impact on their working conditions.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Iris, for giving us that insight. And boy, we look forward to seeing the exciting races coming up at the end of the year after we're done with some of this virus stuff. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Let's hope so.